So I had wanted to review Marvel's The Eternals this week, but due to circumstances outside of my control, I am physically unable to see that movie. So I'll just leave it at that. So I decided to dig into the back catalog it a little bit and review a movie I'd wanted to see a couple months ago, but just never got around to seeing, and that's the Ryan Reynolds starring film Free Guy. And there have been a lot of films that kind of tackle, like, we live in a simulation. You had a couple of years ago Ready Player One. Obviously, the most notable example of this is going to be 1999's The Matrix. This is something that's been tackled before, this kind of particular subject. Movies about people inhabiting video games. We've seen this shtick, this song and dance before. So nothing new there from like an overall standpoint. But what Free Guy does really well is basically everything. It's funny, it's poignant, and let's talk about it. Thanks so much for checking out the review. Before we get started, click on that red subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you know whenever I post a new piece of content. So, I was a little bit surprised after watching this film to find out that it was directed by Shawn Levy. Now, if you don't recognize the name, he directed the Night at the Museum films, the god-awful Pink Panther reboot slash remake starring Steve Martin in the mid-2000s. And that's kind of it. For some reason, I always get him and Tim Story mixed up. Tim Story did like the Fantastic Four, films back in also the 2000s. And he did the Tom and Jerry movie that I reviewed last year. I think it was last year. That's just an absolute piece of hot garbage. And I've always just kind of gotten those two guys mixed up in my head because they've both kind of just been hack directors. And while Tim Story is still very much a hack director, Shawn Levy really crushed this movie and I think deserves a ton of credit for having kind of turned out some trash and then parlayed into executive producing and directing episodes of the TV show Stranger Things. It seems like he's kind of learned a lot and turned a corner in terms of his directing career. So, yeah, everything about this movie simply works. Ryan Reynolds is charming as he always is. He's super funny. The movie is heartfelt. It's relevant. And while this whole like we live in a simulation thing can be a bit hard to tackle and do really, really well, this movie is a home run. It understands what it's trying to do from a storytelling standpoint. It's got a really tight and awesome script. And it very easily could have fallen flat, but it doesn't fall flat at all for a number of reasons. The performances here are fantastic. Ryan Reynolds is great. There's some major cameos that are all really, really, really funny and make sense in the context of what they're trying to do. They dip into the MCU and some other like subjects, some fairly big franchises that I don't want to mention, but they get their due reference here. And films like this, it's really hard to get right because you have to get the right mix of cast and characters and direction and action, and everything about Free Guy is funny and engaging. It's got obviously Ryan Reynolds is the star. Taika Waititi, who directed Thor Ragnarok, What We Do in the Shadows, the criminally underappreciated Jojo Rabbit. He's like the bad guy in the movie. He's pretty funny. He's probably actually like the weakest link of all the major cast of characters, which is kind of interesting because I think naturally he's an extremely funny guy. I think he does better work when he's behind the camera, to be completely honest and blunt with you. But what he does here is just fine, and he's serviceable in terms of the role he plays in this particular story. So it's essentially about a guy who's an NPC in this like video game world, kind of like mixture of I guess like The Sims and an MMO type world where players are like real life players have their characters in this game, and Ryan Reynolds is essentially like an NPC named Guy. And all of this has really worked well into the story, particularly in the very beginning, where you kind of wonder like, okay, where's this going? But everything is really like laid out in a very like straightforward way that's not like in your face. So I'll just leave it at that. But it's all rolled out really well, and he through like no fault of his own and just through the means of the story, he gains kind of like a sense of self-awareness, and all this stuff is really well explained. And then he kind of like takes on a life of his own and realizes like his place in this world, and kind of breaks out of the NPC character to try and like become his own man. And it's kind of this real like I guess you'd call it the hero's journey to a certain extent, but there's also like a larger story outside of the game involving two real life people who have their characters within the game, and they like work on it. They like work for the company that created this video game world, and their involvement in the story is like a huge part of it. Um, and all of it is just really cohesive and hysterical. And yeah, Free Guy is one of those movies that if you didn't get a chance to catch it earlier this year, I would highly recommend it. It's hilarious. It nails everything it tries to do. And in today's day and age, I feel like it could have leaned too hard into like the comedy side. It could have leaned too hard into the emotional side. It could have leaned too hard into the action aspect of it. And yet it manages to keep all of those balls juggling in the air really, really well, and tells a great story. It's not going to win any Oscars. It's not that type of movie. But credit to Shawn Levy for crafting a movie that's fun and genuine and confidently made. I think Levy's always been a competent filmmaker. Like the movies look good and they make sense. I don't think he's ever up until this point been very good with actors. I think between Stranger Things and this, he's really turned a corner and deserves a lot of credit for bringing this all together. And it seems to me like Ryan Reynolds, I think really since he put out, a couple stink burgers with X-Men Origins Wolverine and Green Lantern, both movies that he's lampooned directly in Deadpool, I think he's really turned a corner in terms of his career. And he seems to always now pick kind of the right projects and help shepherd them along. His involvement in Deadpool is the very reason that movie got made. He made this short film, which, was like 5 minutes long, and then ultimately it was pitched to Fox and they accepted it. And then they made Deadpool, and it was this huge, successful franchise, big time because of Ryan Reynolds. And I think this movie doesn't work without him. He really does drive all of the story, and whatever chemistry he has with the director and the other actors really shines here. There's some really, really, really good cameos in this that I wasn't expecting at all. Really I'd say like two or three that really, really stood out to me, and then some references that really hit home, especially for me as fans of these franchises, which we'll not go mention. So, Free Guy, if you like these movies that kind of tackle these meta subjects, we live in a simulation type stuff and life is a video game, I would definitely say check this one out. It hits all the right notes. It is, these movies are hard to make because you have to nail like the nerdy aspect of it, like talking about the Twitch and the streaming and referencing YouTube. Like those things could come off as ham-fisted if you don't tackle them in the right manner and don't have the proper reverence. But this movie does have the proper reference for those things. It's a movie about, a video game world that both makes fun of it and respects it and appreciates it and understands it. And I think all of those elements are something that come together to make this really cohesive and funny film. So check out Free Guy if you haven't yet. It's pretty dope. I'll definitely watch it again in like 6 months, maybe a year, maybe like once in a couple of years. But I really, really like this movie, and it's probably one of the best. It's probably one of the funniest movies of 2021 for sure. So check it out. Thanks so much for checking out the video. If you liked it and found it helpful, please consider subscribing. You can also like and share the video. That tells YouTube that, hey, it's worth promoting. And then hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you think of Free Guy. Did you like it? Did you not? And I'll see you next Wednesday, 9 a.m.